Hello guys. So it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Beautiful day here in Yerushalayim, Baruch Hashem. And you guys are probably waking up just now in New York. For those of you who actually do wake up at 6, I'm not one of these people. maybe I will be in a couple of weeks when I have jet lag, but normally not. So I want to read to you guys an incredible article, at least I thought it was incredible, written by I want to say he's my friend. I never met the guy, only been corresponding with him on social media. Just to give you some background, his name is Baruch. He calls himself Baruch HaSofer, Baruch the writer. But his name is Baruch Kogan, Boris Baruch Kogan. He's a Russian-speaking Jew from the States. He made Aliyah. I don't know when he made Aliyah. I think like 10 years ago, at least. And he actually served in the U.S. military, and he was in, I believe, Afghanistan and Iraq. He served tours there. I don't know if he was in the Israeli army. I know for sure he was in the American army, for sure, at one point. And now he lives in a place called Tepuach, or near Tepuach, in Binyamin. So he wrote what I think is an incredible article here on his Substack. His Substack is actually called Post-Kahanism. So like, you can imagine. The article is entitled Slouching Toward Bethlehem. And the byline is Israel is heading for a civil war. But, I wouldn't go by the byline. Let's take a listen to this article. I'm going to read this to you guys. He writes, I was going to keep writing about the history of the settlements, but current events are getting exciting, so I will take a brief detour. In short, due to the failed policies of the Israeli left and its increasing incoherence, a nominally right-wing coalition has come into power. Since the left has a shrinking minority of voters, it has increasingly been relying on its entrenchment in various institutions, which are not really subject to the desires of elected officials. The pinnacle of these institutions is Israel's judicial system, which really holds sovereignty in that it, quote, decides on the exception. As of 30 years ago, our Supreme Court has declared that everything is subject to its oversight, its powers. Its powers are effectively unlimited, and in more or less a point itself. Why? Because it says so, and nobody who matters has said differently. We have an unwritten constitution, which our self-appointed judicial system writes and rewrites as it pleases, and there is nobody else to turn to if you don't like it. Of course, the judiciary is merely the capstone. Below it are academia, the media, and the educational system. And below them are the civilian governmental offices, the military, the intelligence agencies, the border patrol, gendarmerie, and the police, secret or otherwise. And intertwined with these are Israel's secular and moderately religious elites, the top 5% of the Jewish population, most of whose grandparents were well placed from the establishment of the state, or even before, and the 25% who strive to join their ranks and have internalized their values preemptively, to the degree that they are more Catholic than the Pope, so to speak. Apropos, Stalin once asked, how many divisions does the Pope have? Every single one of them, if every general is a fervent Catholic. Every senior and middle member of this system feels the same way about the Israeli judiciary as a Catholic feels about the Vatican. It's not quite God, but it's as close as you can get. The ruling coalition is attempting to pass some fairly milquetoast judicial reforms, which would mildly limit the judiciary's currently unlimited powers. In a typical Netanyahu rotation, the reform would either be left to die a slow death in committee or be castrated to the point that it would not meaningfully affect the judiciary's sovereignty, but a few factors have aligned to push it forward. First, Netanyahu is facing politically motivated indictments. Since the left has not been able to fight him politically, it is attacking him legally. Apparently he was gifted a cigar or something like that. This reform represents a chance for him to end his days without having eaten jail food. Second, his justice minister, Yariv Levin, has been pushing for this reform for so long that he has hitched his wagon to it. Levin cannot back down One sec, guys. Our cousins feel the need to crank their exhaust, which adds 2 horsepower to the car, but nonetheless. Levin cannot back down. Not back down. This is his chance to become prime minister one day. Third, the rank and file, the Likud in the Knesset, could normally care less about the law, but Bibi is their great white hope. Without him, they have no chance of being the largest party, and thus will be reduced to stealing from the Netivot municipal budget via Chicago-level graft and patronage schemes. Fourth, the Shas party has just seen its leader, Aryeh Deri, removed from the cabinet by the judiciary, and understands that the current situation means that its effective power is severely limited regardless of how many votes it gets. Given that the politicians who would be given a mild amount of rope under the proposal mostly lean fairly left, and that even if it were passed, the left would still own all of the institutions and sectors of society listed above, you'd think that their response would be reasonable. Instead, the left has united in complete, vehement rejection of legal reform. Mass demonstrations, threats by billionaires to take their money and companies out of the country, and, most interestingly, increasing threats of civil war and assassination, some by active leftist politicians. Total uncontrolled rage and hyperbole are the standard. Guys, we told you. We told you. Communists, this is how they work. Guys, zero-sum game for them. Normalcy bias and lack of imagination on the left makes them assume a civil war is impossible, and thus engage in escalating brinksmanship, which continually increase the likelihood of a civil war. Neither side can climb out of the tree, but the left is intent on climbing higher and higher. This may not lead to outright immediate civil war, but does a lot to bring it within the Overton window. Both sides need to be afraid, but the left only stands to lose power, the right to gain it. Further, the actual right is very heavily bound by convention, so that its political victories never can translate into changes it truly desires in a political ratchet mechanism. The left thus benefits from the status quo, in a breakdown of rule of law and convention that no longer holds true at all. The actual right, not the post-revisionists who currently usurp its sentiments, i.e. Likud, I'm just adding that in, has nothing to lose politically from a civil war. He's talking about like Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, all these kind of people. The right is shocked because they finally caught the car they've been chasing. And it turns out that the rules they've been playing with, which were stacked against them in the first place, are subject to being changed even if they manage to start winning. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to repeat to you again. The right wing is shocked. Sorry, just getting a message here. The right wing is shocked because they finally caught the car they've been chasing, and it turns out that the rules they've been playing with, which were stacked against them in the first place, are subject to being changed if they manage to start winning. Well, if the democracy process in its retarded Israeli incarnation is subject to veto and override by threats of violence, then why not just get down to the brass tacks immediately next time? And if violence is how you get what you want, as leftists are trying to demonstrate, then why restrict your goals to those achievable through democratic process? If it's legitimate for you to impose your will on us by organizing a violent mob, then it's legitimate to car bomb said mob. And if that's the discourse, then the right's demands don't need to be what is currently, quote, reasonable. It's him writing this. Because what is reasonable? 70% of the Jews, he's talking about reasonable. There's a rule in the Supreme Court. It's a kind of an ad hoc rule called reasonableness, which they just kind of decide what's reasonable and what's not. Just one second, guys. I'm getting a kind of bombardment here. There's been a lot of sirens, by the way, the last 10 minutes, guys. I hope nothing happened in town. 70% of the Jews of Israel truly desire totally reasonable things, which in the current system are impossible, unspeakable, and getting more impossible and unspeakable all the time. Some examples. Number 1. No more Arab violence and abuse of Jews. This is completely reasonable but impossible in the state of Israel, since the Arabs are acting on behalf of their nation, community, and family. That's why they hand out knafe pastries on the roads every time an Arab murders Jews. Deterrence requires harsh punishment of associated communities and families, such as what happened yesterday after the Arab murder of the Yaniv brothers. I went to the funeral, guys, as you saw. In the village of Huwara, hundreds of Jews came to Huwara and burn dozens of Arab buildings and vehicles. But the state does not accept this reasoning. It prefers to pretend that terrorists are acting on their own individual behalf and should be dealt with by being captured, tried, and jailed. No, Trump wouldn't like them either. They were captured. I don't like those who were captured. Tried and jailed, as though they were common criminals instead of freedom fighters, or as I like to call them, Al-Qaeda, or just jihadists, enemy combatants, representing their people. 1 or 2 dead and 5 crippled Jews every week are just the price we must pay for continued normalcy for the servants of the state, and their ability to take their wives shopping in Paris, London, and New York without the fear of sanctions. Yeah, Bibi and Sarachka, they went to Paris that time. Therefore, the security forces of the state intervened to punish the Jews who had come down to Hawara, and practically all of the members of Knesset, right and left wing, condemned their actions, except for Tali Gottlieb. May God give her Ad Mea Isrim, and all the strength to continue doing what she's doing in the way that she's doing it. Tali Gottlieb, you are awesome. Shkoyach, Hazaku Baruch. Keep going. Number 2. No more LGBTQ freak shows in the streets, schools, military, and entertainment. A supermajority of Israelis are appalled and disgusted by this phenomenon and horrified by the fact that their children are being propagandized to accept it. And yet, there is almost complete unanimity among elected politicians and complete unanimity among unelected servants of the establishment that LGBTQ is not just acceptable but praiseworthy, a quote pillar of the state, as Benny Gantz recently put it. Pidaras. Pardon my language, guys. Pidaras. Okay? Therefore, the state declares that there will be pride parades in Jerusalem and a sex change clinic castrating Jewish children in Sheba Hospital in Ramat Gan. They are performing a sacrament, as it were. Yes, it's actually a religious sacrament. Anyone who blasphemes against this sacrament publicly had better be a taxi driver, plumber, or something equally low status, but plumbers make a ton of money, guys. I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. If he has a high status profession or a business vulnerable to coercion, his life will be destroyed. Number 3, affordable, livable houses as opposed to bombing my phone with messages. As opposed to the dystopian hellscapes of Petah Tikva and Bat Yam. The typical Israeli faces the prospect of spending his adult life living in vile, poorly built, high-density housing owned by a landlord or a bank, spending 40 to 60 hours a month commuting to work. This system serves the state in multiple ways, from ensuring a docile and slavish population of indebted mortgage payers to maximizing its revenue flows via taxation. 70% of Jews can only dream of a small private home of their own for entirely political reasons. The land is all owned by the state and is not for sale to the peasants. Guys, now my friend just pointed out that the Torah actually instructs us, or any government of Israel, to give every Jew a halak of land. Every Jew, myself, and you guys watching included, anybody who's Jewish, who is supposed to own their own parcel of land, and they can do whatever the hell they want with it. Not the government. Not the government. But alas, we don't have that system. We don't operate according to God, unfortunately. We try, but we're not allowed. Number 4, disposing of most of your income as you see fit, even after the mortgage and car payment are made. Various other forms of taxation ensure that 10 to 30% of one's paycheck are available for discretionary spending. There is no other country in the world where normal, working Jews live as poorly as they do here. This is especially egregious given that Israel has its own plentiful source of hydrocarbons, a massive advanced agricultural sector, and high-tech, which it won't shut up about. Yeah, high-tech, startup nation. So why isn't all this productivity translating to a higher standard of living for the majority of Israeli Jews? Apparently, the produced value is being siphoned off for the benefit of the connected minority. In a typical Israeli city, 5% of the working population works for the municipality alone. Guys, I'm going to repeat that again. In a typical Israeli city, 5% of the working population works for the municipality alone. Guys, is this the Soviet Union? What the hell's going on over there? The state has a total consensus about the existing economic structure and is not about to change it. And finally, number 5, not being subject to arbitrary legal destruction. The conviction rate in Israel is in the upper 90%. There is no right to a speedy trial, no right to a trial by jury, and confessions extracted by torture and coercions are admissible. This means that if you get caught in the teeth of the criminal justice system, whether you are guilty or innocent, your life is destroyed. The family court system and the tax authority are quite similar. By the way, they're worse than in America, which is, I don't know if that's how that's even possible. And can destroy your life on a whim. Not proposed legal reform address this. No proposed legal reforms address this. It's not even mentioned in the public discourse, but it involves the crushing of the lives of many normal Israeli Jews. All of these factors add up to structural incentives for most Israeli Jews to desire the downfall of the state. What is on the other side of the scale? The hope that things will get better, fear of attack by the Arabs in the event that the state is weakened, stability such as it is, and the security state. The hope is fading, and even a modest attempt to improve the system on the margins is treated like heresy. The Arabs are waging a constant war of terror which the state is incapable of stopping. Oh, they're capable, they just don't want to. Stability is being destroyed by the overreaction by the left, as well as macroeconomic factors. Mass layoffs have commenced in the high-tech sector, which was half of the Israeli financial engine, and increasing interest rates are destroying the cheap credit, which was the other half. The security state is collapsing due to low salaries and terrible working conditions. I've spent a fair amount of time in countries experiencing or recovering from civil war. Yeah, this guy served just in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? One thing that they all had in common was that before the war started, things were normal. Nobody expected their lives to turn into total warfare, and once it got going, everyone was shocked at how quickly it spiraled and how brutal it became. Every time in retrospect, the avalanche had been building for decades, there for anyone to see, but nobody wanted to see it. My friends, you know what I wrote about? There's a kind of a silver lining that I mentioned with regards to this, or the prospects of what this guy's talking about, guys. I wrote the following, and it's kind of like dark humor, maybe you could say. This is my opinion. The only good part, quote, good part about Jews spending 1900 years in exile and having testosterone, the testosterone literally beaten out of them, is that if Israel was to, God forbid, plunge itself into a civil war, it would not look like the Jewish civil wars we read about in the Tanakh, in the Bible. It would look more like the 1985 debate between Alan Dershowitz and Rabbi Kahana. For those of you guys who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Very good debate. And then at least half of the leftists will leave Israel and conduct their own, quote, settlement expansion of places like Tenafly, New Jersey, or Silicon Valley. Guys, I mean, that's what kind of we're looking at here. My friend Brian is saying, so in conclusion, it could be said that the movement for judicial reform is more motivated by political considerations than gaining justice. Correct me if I'm off. No, I mean, it's motivated by the fact that we have a completely, a Supreme Court here in this country that just does whatever it wants. We don't have a constitution. They rule with impunity. They make up laws as they go along. They go against laws because in the moments where they find it to be, quote, reasonable to do so, or in the moments where they find something that, you know, somebody's trying to do or propose is unreasonable. Basically, they have this thing called reasonableness. So if I decide something's reasonable, and I'm the, I don't know, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, what I say goes, right? And there's no rule of law or no law to stop me. Guys, I mean, perfect example, again. The Supreme Court decided that the head of the Shas party, Aryeh Deri, right, cannot serve as the finance minister. Why? Because he was convicted of financial crimes. What is the basis that they use for this? For banning him from serving as finance minister? Because they said it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable, right? Instead of saying, you know, guys, you should pass a law banning any person who served prison time for financial crimes from serving as financial minister of finance, that would make sense. Then the Supreme Court can rule based on a law. Here they're just ruling because they're saying it's not reasonable. And you could say, well, it's true, it's not reasonable. That doesn't matter. Because the problem is that if they can come and say this with something, you know, kind of obvious, they can also do this with something that is a matter of opinion. You know? Something that is, relative, right? Something that to some people might be reasonable and to others might not be reasonable. 50% of people will say it's not reasonable. Maybe 70% of people will say it's not reasonable, right? So it's not, you know, politics. What is politics is that there are today MKs who stood up, who were part of the last ruling coalition. These MKs, one of them, these guys, was in the Yamina party, or is in the Yamina party, and today he's part of the opposition, but before he was saying that, yeah, we need judicial reform, and then today he's standing up and saying he's going against it. Or the version that, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are proposing, or whoever is proposing, right? Guys, so the political part of this is in the flip-flopping by various politicians in the Knesset. The non-political part is the complete insanity by the leftists of Israel. Either they don't grasp how this judicial system works, and then they don't grasp what is actually on the docket here, what's in the proposals here, or they do grasp it and they know that the judicial system is all they have left, and they feel like they're going to lose the country, and they feel like they already lost the country, and they are going absolutely berserk. My bet is on option number 2, door number 2, okay? Yeah. With that said, guys, I don't know. I don't think we're going to be looking at any kind of physical civil war, and if we are, guys, Has v'Shalom, the extent of it will be basically these people screaming at the top of their lungs with bullhorns, right-wingers either doing counter-protests, or there's probably see, guys, you have to understand something. The Arabs, they love it when we fight amongst each other. They see weakness, and now they're exploiting it, and now they're going to do this wonderful PR campaign, this Pallywood campaign, when we retaliate. Again, as I wrote, I'm going to end off with this, guys. I wrote this yesterday. Very simple, and you guys probably know this already, but I'm going to read it out to you. We are in a schoolyard. Arabs are the bully who provokes, and then cries to the school principal when retaliated against. Leftists are the kid who grabs your arm, makes you hit yourself in the face, and then says, stop hitting yourself, right? Astounding gaslighting from both groups. And in this case, the principal, namely the EU, the UN, international community, whomever, current president of the United States, the principal constantly enables both of them and blames you in any situation. So you go to the principal's office and he's like, it's all your fault. Why are you retaliating? Why did you hit yourself when the guy grabbed your arm to hit you? Why did you let him do it? Why are you retaliating? It's all your fault. Be the bigger person. You're older. You're taller. Whatever. In this case, you have more money. You have more weapons. Be the bigger guy, guys. We should be such a big guy, the bigger guy, to the point where it should lead us to our graves. This is according to the principal of the school, This is what they want. Time to leave the school, or time for a new principal. My friends, that's really the extent of it. And yeah, that's all I'll say for now. All I'm going to say is, guys, actually one more thing. Sorry. I stood around yesterday. I was standing at the funeral of these two boys from Har Bracha, and I looked around me and I saw the kids, and I mentioned this yesterday, the kids who were there at the funeral, 20, 21, 22, and the main thought that crossed my mind is, these kids, most of these kids ran to take the you-know-what. They were told to take the you-know-what by their so-called rabbis, and one of the guys who was speaking at the funeral, his name is Smotrich. And what I'm wondering about is, there are leftists in this country who are against taking the you-know-what. One of them I know, I speak to him, his name is Avi Barak. And I want to ask these leftists the question, if a bunch of these crazy settlers, as they call them, Has v'Shalom, something were to happen to them as a result of taking these you-know-whats, would these anti-you-know-what leftists, anti-stuff leftists, which they exist, dance on the graves of these settler kids? It's a tough question. It's really a tough question. Would they celebrate? Because it means that not only are the settler kids going to have a problem, it means that a bunch of the leftists who took this stuff are going to have a problem. It means that most of the population of Israel, doesn't matter what your political stripe is, or what your religious belief is going to have a problem. So it's now a conundrum, and this is something I think that the leftists, who are at least against the stuff, should think about more than this judicial reform or BB or cigars or champagne or, I don't know, Ben Gvir. This is what should worry them more than this kind of stuff. Anyway, guys, just some food for thought. Talk to you soon.